Hey there, welcome to my channel. This is a philosopher here. And today we're gonna talk about the time traveler's free will paradox. If you ever wanted to know whether you have free will or not, whether your life has any real meaning, or whether you could go back in time and kill your father, then this video is for you. So let's get into it. We'll start with a thought experiment. Imagine yourself as a time traveler who goes back in time too before your parents met. In this timeline, you don't exist yet. You travel back in time and meet your mother. Since you weren't born yet in this world, no one knows who you are, but somehow you manage to make your father fall in love with your mother. And one night, they make love, resulting in a pregnancy. 9 months later, you're born and everything seems fine. Your whole life plays out just like it did in the original timeline, and you end up growing old and dying. Did you change anything by going back in time? No. Did you do anything meaningful? No. Yet you traveled through time and changed nothing. What was the point of that? It might seem that you accomplished something, but really you didn't. You just lived out the exact same life that you would have lived anyway. How is that for an existence devoid of meaning? But wait, what if you decided not to go back in time at all and just let things happen as they may? Would that have been better? Well, no, because in that case, you wouldn't exist either, since your father never would have met your mother. So even though you didn't travel back in time and try to change things, you still managed to accomplish nothing. In both cases, your life played out exactly as it always did. Yet, in the first scenario, you were aware of the fact that you were traveling back in time and had full control over your actions. Whereas in the second scenario, you had no idea that anything was different and just went along with the flow. So, isn't it better to have lived a life in which you knew you were changing the past than a life in which you had no idea that you were even alive? This thought experiment illustrates a serious problem with our understanding of time travel. It's called the time traveler's free will paradox. And it basically says that if you travel back in time, you won't be able to do anything. You lines either have to do exactly what you did in the original timeline, or you lines have to do absolutely nothing. Either way, you won't change anything, and that means that your life, which in this case is literally the entire universe, doesn't have any real meaning whatsoever. How is that possible? Well, let's take a look at each case separately. First, imagine that you did everything the same as in the original timeline. You made your father fall in love with your mother. They make love, and 9 months later you're born. But how did you manage to make your father fall in love with your mother? Wasn't that already set in stone in the original timeline? Maybe not. Maybe your father only fell in love with your mother because you nudged him in the right direction, so to speak. Maybe he only fell in love with her because of the exact sequence of events that you caused by traveling back in time. Maybe he never would have fallen in love with her under any other circumstances. So, if you didn't go back in time, your father probably wouldn't have met your mother at all. And if they never met, they certainly wouldn't have made love, and you wouldn't have been born. But if that's true, then why did you think that you could just go back in time and change things by making your father fall in love with your mother? The reason is simple. You never considered the possibility that you might not be able to change anything. Because if you didn't consider that possibility, you wouldn't have gone back in time in the first place. But since you did consider that possibility, you must have known that it was wrong. Otherwise, you wouldn't have thought of going back in time in the first place. And if you knew that it was wrong, then you shouldn't have done it. But you did it anyway, so your decision to go back in time was irrational. It was based on a false assumption, and if that's true, then you're a bad time traveler. Actually, you're a terrible time traveler. You're the worst time traveler that has ever traveled through time, even worse than that guy who killed Lincoln's assassin. At least he didn't create a paradox. Okay. Let's say you're not a terrible time traveler. Let's say you really do have free will. Then what? Well, then when you went back in time, you could have chosen to do something else instead of making your father fall in love with your mother. For example, you could have made your father fall in love with someone else. Then you would have changed the past, but in doing so, you would have erased your own existence. After all, you were born from the union between your father and your mother. If you weren't born, you wouldn't exist. Therefore, you couldn't have traveled back in time in the first place. So either you didn't change anything or you erased yourself from existence. That's what happens if you have free will. But what if you didn't use your free will? What if you just let things happen? Well, in that case, you wouldn't exist either because your father wouldn't have met your mother. So even though you were present at every moment in this timeline, you didn't really exist in any of them. It seems like no matter what you do, you end up not existing. So what's the point of trying? And more importantly, what's the point of anything? This is what the time traveler's free will paradox tells us. It tells us that if we travel back in time, we can't do anything. We can't change anything. We're just along for the ride. Or maybe the universe fixes paradoxes. Here's how that could work. Let's go back to our thought experiment. Imagine that you go back in time and make your father fall in love with your mother. 9 months later, you're born and you live out the exact same life that you would have lived otherwise. Now, according to the universe, that's not supposed to happen. You're not supposed to just go back in time and copy the past. That's not how time works, so maybe the universe fixes paradoxes by killing you. That would explain why you never noticed that anything was wrong. Maybe you were just a figment of your father's imagination, a dream he had one night, a hallucination caused by some unknown factor in your mother's womb. Maybe you never really existed at all. Of course, that doesn't explain why your father fell in love with your mother in the first place. Maybe the universe fixed that too, by giving him a sudden urge to talk to her, by putting her in his path unexpectedly, by making her move to his town, by giving her a dog that needed to be walked every morning at exactly the same time that he liked to jog, by turning off the TV while he was watching the news so that he'd hear a beautiful singing voice coming from across the street. Maybe your father never really chose to fall in love with your mother. Maybe the universe made sure that he would. If that's true, then you really don't have any free will at all. Everything you do, everything you've ever done, everything you'll ever do is predetermined. There's no such thing as free will. There's no such thing as human agency. We're all just puppets of the universe, and if that's true, then I guess the meaning of life is up to the universe to decide. And it seems like the meaning of life is to just keep living. Thanks for watching.